Welcome into TFW Live. It's the best kept secret in fantasy football where we keep that week one feeling going all year long. This is episode 301, Best Ball Strategy with Hayden Winks. I'm Big Travie, and I'm joined here as always by my best friends Austin and Johnny Game Time Hicks. And a big welcome to you, Whisper Nation, all of you in the chat. But we got to give a big, huge shout out to our YouTube members that are supporting the show through a monthly subscription. Brett Zabo, John Credit, Eric Lorenzen, Donnie Tubbs, Jersey J, Hanimal, and Nick. And also a shout out to our patrons who have supported the show throughout. We have big updates for our Patreon coming this month, so stay tuned. If you'd like to join our growing list of YouTube members, click the join next to the video right now. The join button right there. Click it and you will be ready. And of course, we got to start off with all the social media followers that have joined Whisper Nation this week. Max, Barolo, Philip, Angelo, Ian, Nicholas, Juss, D. Johnson, 9, Andrew Anderson, I think is how that one goes. J. Ray Shrew. And if you love fantasy football and want to join a community where you know you belong, hit that subscribe button on the YouTube channel. We're trying to get just one more subscriber. Just one more. Could be you. And if you're new, let us. Yeah, it could be. If you want to know, if you want to let us know where you're streaming from, we will shout you out right here on the show. But today's show is packed with an awesome guest, very special to the show, Hayden Winks from Underdog Fantasy. What's going on, Hayden?
I love the vibe of the show. The intro music was great. The intro was good. We got the flag up top. I'm here for all of it. You guys' energy is great.
Let's go, Hayden. Let's go, baby.
Covers our terrible takes. Let's go.
Yeah. And, you know, it's going to be fine. We're taking you away from some of that Snoop Connor action here that's in the Hall of Fame game. We're just stoked to get football back, right, fellas? Yeah. I mean, it's awesome that we're, you know, Hayden's been living it right there next to the LA Rams camp, but we are stoked to get it going here. And to start it off, Hayden, before we dive into talking that ball, we want to talk a little bit about you and what you're up to and let Whisper Nation get to know you here. So I'll start it off with what year you started playing fantasy football.
So my intro was in fantasy baseball with my dad, like 20 years ago. And I was obsessed over it. I was the kid reading the newspapers, grinding all the stuff. My dad was like an AL only league. And that kind of, morphed into me playing fantasy football in high school with my friends. And that league still is going today. And then I've been doing it as an actual analyst for like the last 5-ish years, kind of on off. I was working for the Chargers for a second where I couldn't play fantasy. And then since then I've been at Roto World and now Underdog Fantasy. So full time for like 4 years, but fantasy sports for my entire life.
Did that change recently because Austin Eckler is a Charger and he's playing fantasy?
Yeah, Austin Eckler, I think he's going to be around for a while in the media stuff. He's really good at it. He is like a legit fantasy football ambassador, and he's like a really dope guy, like weight room, like everything that you see media wise, he was like that. I had a couple of interactions with him while working. He's just
that's awesome.
Dude, that's awesome. Do you root for your NFL team or your fantasy team more?
Fantasy for sure. The only team I have like a true allegiance to is USC football. I vote for I root for the Angels and the Dodgers. Give me Lakers. I'm an LA guy, but the only team I actually like truly care about is USC football and USC basketball recently. The rest of the thing is just my fantasy squads.
City of Champions. It is what it is. Favorite fantasy player all time, Hayden?
Going back to the baseball stuff, Vladimir Guerrero. That was like my guy forever when he came to the Angels. It was like batting 320, swinging like a madman and still hitting dingers is the best.
He basically bat would hit the dirt almost every time. It was amazing. Fantasy player that's burned you the most.
Most infamously was last year, Trey Sermon. I was a Trey Sermon guy, and that went about as bad as it could possibly have gone. I was wrong on tape evaluation, depth chart. Everything was just bad. So yeah,
that one hurts me. I took him first round in our dynasty league of record. It was bad.
The training camp reports have been positive for the record. I am not.
We're not out yet, man. I'm ready to get hurt again.
I am. Yeah.
What is your favorite live draft memory of all time?
Well, 2 years ago, 2 drafts ago, my co-host Josh Norris set the record for the most accurate mock draft of all time. And we were doing a stream right after it. And like, we obsess over the mock drafts. Yeah. And it was like, I'm literally the best one of all time. There's been thousands and thousands of these. It was actually incredible. And he was so drunk. So like us tracking the mock draft, he was like nailing I think he got like 16 or 17 of the player to teams. Right. It was like absurdly. It was just completely absurd. So that was by far my favorite. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Hayden, what's it been like working for Underdog? I mean, this new platform came on. It's been taking parts of the industry by storm. We have shows built around it. We absolutely love it. You work with them. What has that been like?
Yeah, it's been chaos. I loved working at RotoWorld. RotoWorld was like all fantasy. It was just like blurb, podcast, the usual, the writing stuff. Underdog, I'm doing more marketing stuff on top of the content, which is like good for me. I enjoy it. It's been very fun. But everyone's young. Everyone's got great energy, great ideas. It's just about how do we scale this thing properly. But everybody we work with is got the right energy, and that's like the coolest part.
That's awesome, man. How about turn it a different direction here? Your favorite swear word?
I think anything with shit in front of it, shit idiot, shit bag, any of that stuff's a classic.
Shit idiot.
You stub your toe. Like, yeah, I mean, yeah, you can call somebody a name if you are hurt. It works. Everything. It's not like too vulgar, so I think you can kind of get away with it.
Love it.
What is the, best ball excluded because, those could get real high up there. But what's the most leagues that you've played in one season? Like Dynasty and
probably
redraft?
Not as many as you guys would think. It's probably been 5. I was doing like some baseball leagues. I've been doing a lot of best ball leagues, but that's, like you said, totally different. Yeah, grinding the waivers and stuff's a lot, and I haven't been doing. And I obsess over like the 2 or 3 leagues like I'm most involved in, and anything beyond that, I just like kind of zone out. So it's only been like probably 3 to 5 is usually how many I'll do.
Most exciting fantasy football moment.
Man, that's tough. One thing I always remember is like our peak high school. We had our friend leagues, and every single Sunday we would be over. And week 1 was always nuts. The entire fantasy league would come over to my parents' house, and like the rule was the first touchdown your team scored, you had to go run and jump in the pool. So we'd all be like watching on like the Octo box on Direct TV and like obsessing over. And then right when you just running in the pool, so like all that stuff was the best.
I love
That's
it.
awesome. That's amazing.
So I got 2 questions here for you because our Jersey Jay's got a question. Does Underdog put in lineups to make it harder to win?
So the only difference between best ball and regular is you're not setting your lineups. All you have to do is draft. 18 rounds is the typical draft, and we're going to take your best scoring lineup each week, which makes you're able to do 50, 100. People are doing hundreds and hundreds of best ball drafts because there is no managing, there is no shitty trade offers, none of that stuff. It's just you show up, draft, and then you don't have to worry about that lineup at all. So the lineup thing is, if you make wrong decisions on sit starts, best ball is the platform for you because we'll just take the best version of it.
Love it. So you've dipped your toes. Speaking of best ball, you've dipped your toes. You talked about RotoWorld. You've done the managed league style, and I've obviously listened to the show and stuff. And you talk a little bit about both best ball and managed. I wonder if you'd speak a little bit to the biggest takeaways you have working RotoWorld and then Underdog and between managed and best ball.
Yeah, so I think best ball tournaments, and that's like what most people, when you're talking about best ball, the big difference is like ceiling is what matters. Like Best Ball Mania 3, there's 400,000 people in it. If you're not trying to come in first place, like what are you doing here? Against your friends, you're still trying to come in first place. If it's out of like versus 10 or 12, it's much easier to win. You don't have to come up into first place as often. Then there's like some unique scoring systems. Like I think a lot of leagues are PPR, Underdog's half PPR. And I think the other thing is like I call it better in best ball, like somebody like peak Deshaun Jackson, like Marquez, Valdez, Scantlin, like everyone that's scared to put them in. Yeah. Everyone that's scared to put them into your weekly lineup. In best ball, you draft them. You just take the spike weeks when they have 0 points. It doesn't matter to you. So like those are like the main differences, but for the most part, you're just generally drafting for even a higher ceiling than you otherwise would have been.
Love that. Here on the show, Hayden, we like to, we do a little thing called reach for your guy. And so, being that the football season is right around the corner, who is your favorite guy to reach on this year, or a guy that you're willing to, hey, I understand I'm going to have to pay a round or two above what ADP is, but I am going to get this guy on my team because he is going to be that electric. Who's that guy for you this year? Trey Sermon again?
if we get into like a 20 round draft, I can sell you on Trey Sermon. For me right now, it's Melvin Gordon. I think there's like 2 ways you can kind of get there. One, if like today's news that he's in a 55-45 timeshare, he goes in like round 10 on Underdog. In some leagues, he might even go a little later than that. I think there's a chance he just like pays off that price tag, even in a committee. And then if Davante gets hurt, I think this offense is going to be electric. As we know, Melvin Gordon has done it before. He's going to play all 3 downs. Their third string running back, Boone is just always
Mike
been
Boone.
a special teamer. I like him. He's explosive, but like they're never giving him the ball. So if something ever happens to Davante, Melvin Gordon would be in line for like 20 touches. And there's not many running backs in that range that have like, maybe he can be a flex play, and at the same time, he could be a top 5 fantasy running back.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
Last question here for you, Hayden. Kickoff's in 2 minutes. You're still deciding your flex. Do you go with your gut or your weekly rankings?
Yeah, I mean, I have no choice but to answer this as weekly ranking because I do weekly rankings. And if I'm saying I'm not basing my own lineups, then what is anyone going to click on my stuff for? Yeah, I'm always the mental. I got the analytics and all that stuff. It's less of a gut feeling for me, so I have to go the rankings.
Take the decision fatigue out of it. Well, appreciate you answering those questions for us, Hayden. We're going to jump in to some real news, or maybe not real news. We'll kind of decide that here on the panel. The first of which is that the Athletics' Kevin Fishbane and Adam Johns report that David Montgomery is seeing reps on special teams. Johnny, does this kind of we've heard of players going from special teams to starters, but maybe not starters to special teams. How are you feeling about David Montgomery in this situation?
Yeah, certainly not running backs. Like, I can understand, like OBJ, he did it, but that made sense. Like, he's a super electric, dynamic wide receiver, and he can make plays in the open space. Like, what are we doing? David Montgomery's history has shown like he's the most fragile running back. He's very good, but he is very fragile. And all of a sudden, oh yeah, hey, I think it's a good idea to put that guy on special teams and kicking and receiving punts. Yet that scares the hell out of me. I'm not going to lie. It's almost as if they want this guy. I say this sounds bad, but like it sounds like they want him to kind of die and go away. So that way they don't have to repay him. But I mean, if you're in a league where you do get return yards, you kind of do like this news a little bit because any little fantasy points could end up helping you win. But certainly as someone who's like been a fan of David Montgomery and wanting him to get more opportunity, this was not the more opportunity that I had in mind to get on the field.
Well, speaking of more opportunity, the Chargers are, the Athletics, Daniel Popper, who covers the Chargers, notes that Isaiah Spiller continues to play primarily with the second and third teams. I basically just wanted to bring this up to say we had that first report come out that he was running with the first team and he was the only one, besides Eckler running with it. She then edited her report and said, look, everybody's kind of got mixed in with the first team. So this is just another call to Whisper Nation to not just read the headline and go with that. Do a little bit of digging or come to us, ask us in our Discord, which you can get to with the link, and we'll try to parse through that a little bit. But I want to move on to Pittsburgh here and ask Hayden about his boy. Well, not his boy. I mean, Mitch Trubiski is apparently not looking sharp. That's per Athletics Mark Caboli. But I know that you're a big Pickett stan, or I've heard you at least be on that side there. And apparently this blurb said that he's, Pickett's even behind Trubiski and that, maybe Mason Rudolph is going to get some first team reps. How are you feeling about just Pittsburgh, the quarterback situation, the whole offense?
It sounds really bad. Like all of them, seem like they're struggling. I guess compared to the market, I thought that Kenny Pickett could play a little bit more. I thought he was more athletic. His accuracy was there. I did have struggles with like his overall going through progressions. He was not like this check down 1-2. He was kind of more like a big play specialist, which I thought people kept getting that wrong. But at the same time, he didn't not go in the top 10 for a reason. I have very low expectations in general. I just thought other people were like, he's the same as Desmond Ridder. I was like, no, I think he's a little bit above that. I'm expecting him to play week 4, week 8, somewhere in that range. I think he's going to finish the year. Maybe they give Trubisky the first couple of games, but I'm not a big Trubisky guy myself.
I kind of was liking Trubiski, especially in best ball late, because he has that rushing upside a little bit too. But I'm a little bit worried about this Pittsburgh offense. I keep wanting to trust Tomlin and like all these things, but it gets you a little bit woozy.
Trubisky's a game time player. He just turns it on.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, we hope so. Missing all those passes and drills. Moving on to New York, the Athletic Zach Rosenblatt writes that Elijah Moore seems to have firmly established himself as the number 1 receiver. Austin, we're here for all of this, right?
Yeah.
I'm glad to see it, and I'm a little bit bummed that I wasn't able to get Elijah Moore in our Dynasty League before this news broke. With the Garrett Wilson draft pick, everybody had been slotting Garrett Wilson to be that number 1 guy, and we quickly forget that Elijah Moore during weeks 9 through 13 of last year, right before he got hurt, Elijah Moore was the number 2 overall wide receiver in the NFL, just behind Justin Jefferson and ahead of Deebo Samuel and Stephon Diggs. During that exact same stretch, Garrett Wilson had 0 points. So I like Elijah Moore. I like what he could do. I think he was getting a little bit overshadowed by the splashy pick. That doesn't say anything about Elijah Moore's talent. He is good. I would be happy to have him on my dynasty team.
What does this do for Braxton Berrios? What does this do for our boy Braxton Berrios?
Yeah,
he's fine.
He's the stud. Yeah, he's already in there. Yeah. All right. Denver had some bad news, kind of the first big major injury, I would say, of the offseason. Broncos beat writer Mike Cleese reports that Tim Patrick suffered a torn ACL last Tuesday here of this week. Johnny, I really just want to ask what this means for like Jerry Jeudy, maybe Albert O, and the the environment of the wide receivers and pass catchers in Denver.
This makes me extremely sad because I love TP. I loved his ADP. I thought he was going to be – he is a really good wide receiver. And then getting him paired with Russell Wilson, I thought he was going to have a really good fantasy season. Obviously, out for the season. That means that, now opens the door potentially for Jerry Jeudy to actually be able to meet expectations. I still don't think they quite put him out as the wide receiver on the outside. You used to got KJ Hamler out there, who becomes interesting. And then, Albert O, talking about him, he should see a slight uptick as well in targets because of it. But definitely hurts this offense, in my opinion, because I do believe Tim Patrick was that good of a wide receiver for them.
Friend of the show, Cecil Lammy, was even saying that Tim Patrick had designed plays especially for him in this offense. So that's something that's coming off the table now. We'll see what's going on there. Hayden, we're going to end it with Deebo Samuel, who has been in the news this week because he said he's willing to do whatever it takes when asked about his role heading into 2022, even trying to dismiss the rumors that he didn't appreciate being used as a running back but not getting paid for it. Hayden, with Deebo, we've had this situation where we liked what he did last year, but it looks like regression is coming for our guy here. Do you feel the same, or does this kind of news help you end the contract? Evan Silva pointed out the incentive for running back is kind of team friendly, meaning they could probably use him more that way again. How do you feel about Deebo, and where are you taking him here this year?
I have him ranked, I think, 30th overall, which is like well after ADP. He's been going second round in Underdog. And I think the two main reasons is, one, the regression, like his numbers, even if he is a superstar, which I completely agree with, superstars still don't even reach those levels of being an outlier. And then the second part to me is, as much as we don't like Jimmy G, and yes, I can agree that he's stunting the 49ers' chances of winning the actual Super Bowl, he still is an efficient passer. Like whether we agree it's him or the offense and all that stuff, I think you're adding a little bit of variance coming with Trey Lance, who I thought had some struggles even at in college, just about his mechanics and what he was doing with the offense. He can throw the pretty deep ball, but there's some inconsistencies there. And like, this is notoriously slow pace offense, notoriously run first offense, especially with Trey Lance. So I'm a little bit nervous about spending a second round pick on a wide receiver. I've been going Trey Lance and then Brandon Ayuk, or I'll go George Kittle, and at least I'm soaking up the tight end spot. But I think Deebo is more of a third round pick.
Love it. And we love Hayden being here from Underdog Fantasy Football. This is just a reminder that you can use promo code TFW for up to $100 in matched money from Underdog. I think it comes right from Hayden's pocket, so he will match your money. Yeah, $100 right from his paycheck if you use the promo code TFW. And a big announcement, we are launching Best Ball Brunch this Saturday on the TFW channel here. So 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. We'll be drafting on Underdog. Come win some money with us live. Whisper Nation needs to know a little bit. I know you kind of prefaced it a little bit here, Hayden, but just one more time, an overview of what Best Ball is. It's taking the industry by storm, but a lot of our viewers, a lot of our listeners are that managed league. They come in around this time to play in their, home league. But Best Ball, man, it's a great opportunity to get in there, have some fun. Tell them about it.
Yes, I think the big thing is the prize pools are ridiculous. We have a $10 million prize pool with Best Ball Mania 3. That's a $25 entry. We also have the Puppy, which is only a $5 tournament. I'm done with the mock drafts. I think Best Ball has replaced mock drafts now. I think we have to just do some Best Ball drafts. The ADP at Underdog is from users who have been spending money on it. So it's a good way to figure out in your home leagues where players should be drafted versus the default rankings. But ultimately, 18 rounds. You don't have to stay your lineups. You can do a bunch of drafts if you want to, and all of a sudden you have a good feel for what strategy you like this year, which spots do you like to draft from, who your favorite sleepers. You can kind of figure it out against other people who are also doing the same thing. And you can win $2 million in first place if you have the nuts.
Hayden, you kind of created that better in best ball metric, I think, that you use, right? And I wanted to ask, you're talking about, hey, get out there and use best ball drafts as your guide. Do we think that the variance between like a better and best ball player and a managed league player is enough to persuade people to do that? Or do you think the variance isn't that much? Like, get out there and draft on Underdog.
Yeah, there's some minor differences for the most part. And I think like we've galaxy brained into like week 17 correlation, which I don't even want to get into, but there's some reasons why the ADP might not be exactly perfect, but I still think it's better than like ESPN's default rankings or Yahoo's default rankings or wherever you're drafting your home leagues. This is still the best way to do it. And you got to practice. Like you can do a full draft and you can watch that team.
People are live bodies are in there, which is
exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, you're doing like a calculator, and then like all of a sudden, like everyone's abandoned it, or the calculator is like giving you like the most stacked team ever. Let's have some realistic teams, and you got to sweat it out the entire season too. So might as well.
Love it. Well, what we kind of did today was take a few of your articles and kind of chop them up. Each of us kind of took a little bit of what you had out there, and there's great stuff. Whisper Nation, if you're watching on YouTube, all the links to the articles we're going to discuss today are in the description. The first one we're going to start with is the absolutely free 99 2022 Underdog Football Show Draft Guide. And in that, you have all sorts of great infographics, so shout out to the team over there. But one of the infographics that kind of caught my eye was the 10 must-draft players, Hayden, that you had. And one of those is Elijah Mitchell. And I chose him because he's been such a polarizing person, both in managed, best ball, whatever. And that backfield, obviously, we talked a little bit about Shanahan and that stuff. Yeah, you called Mitchell a speed back, a shoe-in to be the lead back. We look at San Fran's offense, Hayden. They've been top 12 in rushing attempts and top 10 in running plays over 15 yards in 3 of the last 5 seasons. Mitchell himself was 4th in runs over 10-plus yards last year. We know he's a risk to seed like passing game work to and maybe because of Trey Lance too, that's an issue. But is his must-draft status for you basically a bet on his talent as a pure rusher or the scheme or both?
I think it is both. I think that he's a perfect fit in it, and that's why I think Trey Sermon ultimately kind of busted. Is Shanahan likes the speed, and I think that is especially going to be the case with Trey Lance back there. I just think if you look at his stats from last year, like you said, he's just such an explosive rusher. This is what this offense does historically. If you look at last year's per game numbers, he was equivalent to 32nd overall in my metrics, and he's going in the 6th round against some other running backs like Antonio Gibson, Josh Jacobs, who I just can't project for as many explosive plays. I'm not projecting him for passing downs, but I don't think there's anything about Elijah Mitchell's game where we should just say he'll never do that. There's even a little upside that he could develop into that role. And I think the thing that's making Elijah Mitchell a good value right now is everyone's so scared of the Kyle Shanahan history with running backs. But if you look at it, they've just been getting injured. And I think that's just a lot of injury, bad luck. And Elijah Mitchell was very good last year. And like the Alfred Morris years, there was a couple years with Devonta Freeman where it's like back-to-back seasons. They do go to them if they can stay healthy. So I'm not sure if I'm ready to say that Elijah Mitchell is like more prone to injuries just because he's attached to Kyle Shanahan. I don't know if they're feeding him the wrong things or whatever, but I'm not willing to go there. So I'm just going to ride this thing out. I know the offense is going to be good because it always is. And I'm pretty positive that Elijah Mitchell is good himself.
It's that system is very harsh on running backs because of the type of cuts they have to make, and then again, generally when you talk about speed and running backs, they're on the lighter end of that, and so we always talk about how running the ball is like a car accident, right? When they're getting hit, so it does kind of make sense that a lot of these running backs do end up getting banged up and injured often because you're compounding it with two very vicious kind of football players. But yeah, Elijah Mitchell is very fun to watch and very electric when he gets the ball and when he's on the field.
Yeah, I also think to your point, Hayden, we saw them try to make Mostert the thing. He just couldn't stay healthy. So they were still, though, returning back. Like last year, even with the Sermon stuff where we got fooled, Mostert took the first snap. Like Mostert walked out there before he got hurt.
And then he got injured on the second snap.
So you just hope that we get a little bit more durability out of.
He did bulk
Mitchell
up a little bit, and he is a little bit bigger than Raheem Mostert in general. So they're developing a plan, and so maybe there is something to the system that makes it that way. But I think going back to the best ball versus your redraft league is like In best ball, you got to come in first out of hundreds of thousands of people. So you got to be mega right. In your home league, if you miss on your 6th pick, that does stink. Maybe you want a little bit more safety. But I think in best ball, especially half PPR, I think Elijah Mitchell kind of checks a lot of boxes.
Yeah, and I think the reason I wanted to bring up those 10-plus yards, 15-plus yards in the system, kind of that best ball notion, it's like he may not get pass catching. Maybe he doesn't get goal line. Maybe they give that to TDP or Sermon or Blance. But he's going to have big plays. And in best ball, that's a good thing. So we'll move on here. But to move from a positive to a negative here, Hayden, you're throwing shade at everybody's boy here, Breece Hall, and saying he's part of your 10 players to avoid. I'll let people go and read it on the site here, but is this purely just an ADP play based on the guys that are going around him?
Yeah, I just think it's ADP, and I have nothing against Breece Hall. I thought maybe Ken Walker's a little bit better of a rusher, but Breece Hall had a great profile. My metrics liked him. I thought he was a good player by himself. The offensive line is better than it is in Seattle, all that stuff. At the end of the day, the Jets are projected for 5.5 wins this year, and they're going to use a committee, and Michael Carter, I think, is pretty good. So a lot of things have to go right for him to be pay off a 4th round ADP. I think what's going to happen, he's probably going to be like a flex play to start the season, then kind of develop into an RB2. There's a lot of players going right next to him where I think you're just going to have RB2 production the entire time. So this is more of a bet against Zach Wilson more than anything. And if Breece Hall was a 5th round pick, 6th round pick, he would be nowhere near this. I just thought it was a little unfair that Kenneth Walker goes 110th overall and Breece Hall goes 40th overall when they were drafted 4 or 5 picks apart in the actual NFL draft.
That's a good point there. Yeah. You also have a metric in here, or a infographic that says the ideal draft, and you kind of list all your players, but you started at 104. So, Mr. Winks, we have asked several guests before their favorite spot to draft from. You selected 104 in the guide. I wonder if you'd speak to why you like 104 so much.
So, I think there is a top 4. I think people throw in Jamar Chase at the end of it. Maybe somebody puts Austin Eckler into it. I think there's a top 4. I think Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp project for so many more targets than Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase is a baller in his own right, but Justin Jefferson could have 200 targets here. And I would be pretty surprised if Jamar Chase did that. Mm-hmm. So I like going Justin Jefferson at the 4 spot. And the reason why I like is the running backs at the round 2-3 turn to me look really good. Like, there's definitely a little bit of risk, but like Leonard Fournette has tons of upside. Javonte Williams has tons of upside. James Conner, DeAndre Swift, Saquon Barkley's kind of graduated from that tier, but there you can go Justin Jefferson, running back, and all of a sudden I've got like my anchor wide receiver, 2 stud running backs that I'll bank on staying healthy, and then from rounds 4 all the way to round 10, hammer a couple more wide receivers and get out of there. But I just think that Justin Jefferson has special ability. The offense projects better, but more importantly, the round 2-3 turn, I like the running backs at that spot.
Smart.
Yeah, and maybe not as much the wide receivers in that range too. Like there's a little bit more questions in that range too. We've got some questions about the Buffalo offense. We've been hearing a lot of talk surrounding the secondary passing options in Buffalo, and rightfully so when we look at like Josh Allen leading this offense. The catchy narrative with Dawson Knox, who you have as a must draft or an ideal draft in the 9th round of a best ball tournament here, is that he was 2 touchdown dependent. But you and Josh have done some work to counter that narrative. I've also heard the great Matt Waldman say that when Allen looks to go down the seam and the tight throws, he looks to Dawson Knox. So do you think there's a scenario where we've kind of got it wrong on Gabe Davis, McKenzie, Crowder, James Cook, and really Dawson Knox could be that guy to kind of trickle in a few of all those targets and be the secondary option there?
Yeah, so I have a touchdown regression model myself. Yes, he is a negative touchdown regression candidate, but at the same time, he was 2nd in expected touchdowns. He was, I think, top 3, maybe top 5 in routes run in the red zone. The reason why he scores so many touchdowns is because he plays for the Bills, and Josh Allen throws a lot of touchdowns. So he's a very athletic player, and like you said, I think he can pay off this ADP just by the trickling down, just because his offense plays with so much pace, so much neutral pass rate. But at the same time, I think that there's a little more fragility at the wide receiver position compared to last year's. What happens if Steph Diggs goes down? What happens if Gabe Davis isn't as good? All of a sudden, you have a year 4 player with great athleticism who has been progressing each year. And all of a sudden, you have him attached to Josh Allen. So I like him better compared to like TJ Hawkinson, Dalton Schultz. I think that Dawson Knox is underrated as a pure talent, and the scheme is perfect. He was like top 5 in routes run last year too. So I think his floor is pretty safe, even if you regress some of the touchdowns. And this is one of those offenses where I can just keep saying, oh, he's a negative touchdown regression candidate for 3 straight years, and that's just because Josh Allen's going to outproduce those models, you know?
I was going to say, I'm old enough to remember, and even as a Packers fan, that Davante Adams was scoring too many touchdowns.
Yep.
Like, he had 2 back-to-back double-digit touchdown years after almost being a bust. I'm not saying Dawson Knox is Davante Adams, but also Aaron Jones was a guy that we kept saying touchdown regression for, right? And then it's like, oh, wait, these guys play in Aaron Rodgers' offense. These guys in Buffalo play in Josh Allen's offense. So if we like Josh Allen that much, then maybe there's something there to say with Dawson Knox.
Do we know if Knox is on Josh Allen's fantasy team again this year? I think
that would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be helpful, because I think that could be a reason why he was targeting him so much in the end zone last year, is because he was like, hey, I need these 6 points for my team.
Right.
There was a couple of plays. I think a crazy play where Josh Allen was scrambling to the right, and then he was like arguably out of bounds. He just like tossed it up. Dawson Knox caught a touchdown there. So there was like a lot of randomness, but to get lucky in the touchdown department, you have to be in the red zone, and this Bills team, trust me, will be in the red zone. So I will roll the dice on Dawson Knox. And like, Steph Diggs misses time, like, man, like Dawson Knox, I think could like lead into like the top 3 conversation. Like, I'm seeing like a little bit like Darren Waller, where athleticism, all of a sudden like the targets that aren't as valuable around him, and all of a sudden you're in a good offense with a decent quarterback, and like you're rocking and rolling. So he might be my favorite player. I should have done like the reach thing instead of Melvin Gordon. I should have done for Dawson.
Well, we'll let you redact Melvin Gordon.
Yeah, you can do
we'll edit it. We'll go
addendum.
back.
Well, addendum, right? That's
as long as the live people don't say anything. All right, so we'll move on to the next article here, which was you did an article for the top 50 fantasy football storylines heading into NFL training camp.
I do have a question on this. Your number 6 question was, how are Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon splitting reps? We kind of touched on this earlier in the show, but we didn't super dive into it, and we haven't really dove a significant amount on this show. So we kind of wanted to talk to you about this. Last year, we know it was literally a 50-50 split between Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams. This year, a lot of people are expecting Javonte to, take and capture the bulk of the carries there. What are you hearing and seeing or thinking that this split is going to be? Because as we all know, new coaching staff, Justin Alden is now the, I believe I said that right, now the offensive coordinator, who comes from Green Bay and Atlanta, has that, Kyle Shanahan coaching tree, coaching system. So what are you expecting and seeing, hearing about Javonte and Gordon's split this year?
For Broncos coverage, I look at Benjamin Albright and Mike Kliss just in general, and it seems like they're on the same page that Javonte Williams is the one, but is more of the 1A to the 1B. And last year, Melvin Gordon would come on the field first, and in the next series, it would be Javonte Williams. I think it's going to be the inverse of that, with a little bit more towards Javonte Williams, but I do think that they probably view Melvin Gordon as the more reliable pass catcher. And last year, Melvin Gordon was the more consistent runner against in that wide zone scheme. And I think that Javonte Williams has a little bit of room for improvement there. But at the same exact time, I am looking at upside here. So I think the most likely scenario is you're drafting Javonte Williams 24th overall, and he really ends up being like the 32nd overall player, slight loss, but there's a chance that he has a top 3, top 5 season in him. And I think ultimately in fantasy, we have to be playing for ceiling. So I think this was a slight win for Melvin Gordon, maybe a slight loss for Javonte Williams, but I was always projecting kind of a 60-40 split here. And even if my median projection for Javonte is a little bit lower than where his ADP is, I still want that path to that like Jonathan Taylor type of season. I still think that Javonte Williams has that, even if it requires an injury or Melvin Gordon missing time.
Well, and maybe it just their hand gets forced. If you look at some of the moves, like the way they let Melvin Gordon test the market, right? And then he kind of came back. And it's like they could start 60-40, but a month into the season, they go, hey, like Javonte's that dude. He's got the dog in him. Like, let's get it going right now.
Yeah.
And do you think he'll get the first crack at the red zone touches and the goal line?
The pass catching's the other stuff too. Like, who's going to get the split on that?
Yeah. So last year was more or less like I get the first drive, you get the second drive, and then Melvin Gordon will end up playing a few more snaps because he would come in start the second half as well, even if he finished the last drive. I think that's where it's going to be the inverse, where Javonte is getting the first crack at it. It's not like other backfields where it's like, I'm the passing down guy, you're the short yardage guy. It's a little bit just kind of Melvin and Javonte can kind of do a little bit of each of it. So it really just comes down to Javante's development. Going back to like the scouting reports, Javonte Williams, like early declare, was a valedictorian at his high school. Daniel Jeremiah said he's like the best interview of the draft class. So I think that there's reasons for optimism for Javonte Williams. So I didn't really move my rankings much at all for this report. And this is
Javante's just so fun too. You watch him on film, he just like confirms what you think about him. Yeah.
Yep.
He definitely is on that one.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, Hayden. So another question you have here are, where are the Chiefs wide receivers lining up? And so I wanted to dive in this with you because the reason why it's so significant and why it's important to know these kinds of things, the X's and O's part, is because, we obviously know Tyreek Hill not with the Chiefs anymore. Last few years, he's flirted with 24% or above target market share. And then, most people now are expecting, it could be, spread out, or, it could go to one guy one week and another guy another week. However, if we look at Andy Reid and his history of wide receivers and targets, we saw that, Jeremy Maclin, before Tyreek Hill had the 24% market share, Jeremy Maclin had 25% market share in this offense for multiple years. So it does end up being somewhat important where these guys are lining up, because that could potentially tip a cap or tip a hand as to who that guy could be for Kansas City this year to help fill those voided targets. So where are you thinking players are going to, ultimately end up lining up, and who do you think gets in the bulk majority of those targets, besides Travis Kelce, because Travis Kelce is going to get his 25%.
Yeah, so I think that Marquez Valdez-Scantlin's the easiest to project because he's the downfield threat. That's not where Juju wins. That's not where Mecole Hardman wins necessarily. That's not where I don't think Sky Moore is going to end up winning. He's going to be on the outside. He's going to be running those deep routes. He also got more money in the second season. I think it was 3 years, $30 million, a little more guaranteed money than we were expecting. So I think that MVS is like a very safe pick, at least in best ball. I think he's going to be out there no matter what. He's a lock to score, 4 or 5 long touchdowns this year in this offense. Juju Smith-Schuster is going ahead of MVS, and I think probably because he projects for more targets, receptions. I think he's going to start in the slot. I think there's a chance that he would play in 2 wide receiver sets as well, which he was doing in Pittsburgh before Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson got there. I think he's physical enough to do that. So I feel good about Juju. Sky Moore versus Mecole Hardman is kind of where the debate is to me. Are they going to be playing on the outside? Or are they going to be playing on the inside? I think ultimately Mecole Hardman's probably going to start the season as the number 3 receiver. He's the gadget guy. And then eventually Sky Moore is going to earn those reps. But Sky Moore has been balling out in camp. And what makes this so challenging for fantasy is Patrick Mahomes goes in the 5th round now, which is very intriguing to me on Underdog. And you can get any of these guys after Patrick Mahomes. So clearly if Patrick Mahomes rebounds to the around 3 value, somebody's getting dragged along. Most likely 2 of these guys are getting dragged along. So my favorite would be go Juju and then MVS. They're also the 2 most expensive. But I'm open to Mecole Hardman breakout season. I'm open to Sky Moore breakout season too.
Nice. I love that. Last question I got for you here. We're talking the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Mixon is, obviously the starter there for Cincinnati Bengals. And when he is healthy, we've seen Zach Taylor, he just will feed him. He will give him 66% or more of the rushing share. The interesting part is that we have seen when Joe Mixon, because he has been banged up from time to time, Zach Taylor, the backup running back, comes in and he ends up taking those Joe Mixon roles. It's not like this kind of split kind of thing where he goes between multiple running backs. He usually gives the bulk of the carries to one guy, making him what we like to say a straight up handcuff for a dog. So what I want to know is which one of these guys is that guy, because right now we don't necessarily know who the dog is in this as the backup here. But, again, statistically, we should want to have that guy just in case Joe Mixon does go down, because he's been known to do that.
I think Chris Evans is a dog, and that's my guess.
Okay.
It sounds like Samaje Perine and Chris Evans
Just
still
a dog.
battling.
That's
He's
just
just total dog.
disappointing. He's a total dog.
He's a total dog. He's just like freak athlete, and they were using him on passing situations at times last year as a rookie. And I just think that there's upside for more. He hasn't proven this at the college level. He didn't prove it in the as a prospect. He didn't get drafted high. But if you just sort by athleticism, Chris Evans is a total dog. So I've been rolling the dice on him. I just can't do with Samaje Perine. He's making less money than the Best Ball Mania 3 winner, which is immediately on my do not draft list if you're making less money than the Best Ball Mania 3 winner. And he is, so I have to go to Chris Evans. I don't feel very confident in that, but he is worthwhile in like the 17th, 18th round of Best Ball leagues. So like you said, whoever the running back is for the Bengals, our offense is too good. We're going to want pieces of him. So I've just been rolling the dice on Chris Evans.
You think Evans profiles as a guy who can do the between the tackle stuff, though? Like if he gets it?
Good enough.
You think so?
I think there's a chance too. I think Samaje Perine might, but I'm not sure. I think
the case is like if Perine, like if Mixon's out, Perine's ceiling is like RB3-ish, or RB2, 3, and then if Evans is the guy when Mixon's out, maybe there's a little bit more there.
He's the dog.
Exactly.
I love it.
All right, good stuff there. Austin, wanted to talk to you a little bit about your next article, which is the zero RB guide for an ideal zero RB guide for 2022 in best ball.
Exactly. Hayden, you write, and I quote, I believe zero running back teams are drafting too many wide receivers because they believe the position is more volatile than it really is. If our zero running back team is smashing, it's definitely because the wide receivers we drafted early are smashing. So why not actually bet on them doing so by drafting fewer of them, wide receivers in general? We do this by drafting elite tight ends, elite quarterbacks, and with superhero running backs. But the general zero RB narrative is that we still want we want a lot of depth at the wide receiver position. I disagree, me being you. Just look at the teams last year who had the elite wide receivers. And you've got this great chart here that you put together. And I was hoping you could speak a little bit on this chart at the data we're looking at and break it down for us like we're not smart people.
So this is looking at the best wide receivers from last year, and I took it from different parts of the draft. So Davante Adams, Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, Elijah Moore, Christian Kirk, Amon-Ra St. Brown. They completely smashed at their draft capital. Then I looked at how these teams did in Best Ball Mania 2 on Underdog last year, how many wide receivers they took. And the teams that had 10 wide receivers with these performed not as good as they did with 6 or 7. Those two were the highest. So it goes back to my strategy. If you're drafting 5, 6, 7 stud wide receivers, like let's say your top 5 out of your top 8 picks are wide receivers, you don't need 8, 9, 10 wide receivers. You've already put your eggs into this basket. If those wide receivers aren't doing well, your team's not doing well. Yeah. So this goes back to the thing. Like if you drafted an elite tight end, when are you drafting your second tight end? It's the very last round. We do this with quarterbacks. We do this with running backs. We don't draft 4 good running backs.
Right.
But I see this all the time with zero RB, and I really want to make zero RB viable because I think that it's not being utilized enough. Not enough people are doing zero RB, but I think the people that are doing zero RB are so obsessed about these wide receivers and they hate running backs with such a passion that they wait too long. I think that a zero RB team could be 5 wide receivers, and then you go Elijah Mitchell, and then Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then Melvin Gordon. That to me is still zero RB enough, and you only draft 6, 7 wide receivers. I think that's like the skeleton key to zero RB.
But also, like, are you saying that you also want to attack the other positions like QB or tight end, like in that span too? Like maybe you don't have to. So for these guys that hate RB so much, maybe they don't have to. They could go get a Kyler Murray later or a Jalen Hurts later, right? And a tight end that they really like or that we project to be good to make those positional advantages at that position.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that you can have like I think it's like you can get funky and you can have like 6 or 7 running backs funky if they're going like. If your first one's Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then you're drafted a bunch of handcuff types, and then a couple like Raheem Mostert types that might get you 10 points, and you have 6 or 7 of them because they happened late. And meanwhile, your first 5 picks were wide receivers, and you say that's enough. These guys got to go ham. Like what is a Jarvis Landry doing on a team with Justin Jefferson and T Higgins and those guys. Like if Jarvis
Not
Landry's in your lineup, that's not good.
Yeah.
So that's a great touch on there of how we should be approaching the wide receivers from a 0 running back draft build and factoring in some of the other positions as well, specifically tight end and quarterback, and getting elite options there to go with those top level wide receivers. But now let's talk about the running backs. You follow up and say the debate really is, how far should 0 running back push? As in, what is the proper range to draft the RB1? As a baseline, I, meaning you, included the data from the last 2 seasons, which shows a clear drop-off when teams waited until round 9 for their RB1. But there also was a round 5 drop-off in 2020. I'm guessing we're going to be in this round 5 through 8 range for as late as we should be punting running back on Underdog Fantasy in particular. This is especially true with wide receivers becoming more expensive and running backs becoming cheaper each season. In full PPR, with waivers and with wide receiver price tags relatively cheaper, I'm open to the RB1 window being even later than round 8. So here on screen, we've got the chart that you shared. This is clearly great data. Again, can you speak a bit on this chart and talk like we're not really that smart of 5-year-olds?
Yeah, this chart is absolutely chaos. And basically what it's showing you is how teams are performing based off of how many running backs they have through each round. So if you have 3 running backs through round 8 or 2 running backs, and basically you can kind of see the sweet spot of how many running backs you should have throughout each pick. Because most of the best ball discussion has been like, how many running backs should you have at the end of the draft? But that question should be answered by when you were drafting them in the first place. So this is kind of keeps you on track. And going back to the 0 RB discussion, half PPR data is so much different than full PPR data. And I think best ball data is much different than managed data as well. So I think right now, round 6, round 7 is about as far as I would be wanting to push my first running back. Maybe you can get to round 8. But I think like that, if you're skipped over the Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Cordero Patterson, that kind of tier of running backs, and now you're getting into like the James Cook types. Like, to me, you've punted this thing too far, especially going back to, I want to commit to my 5 stud wide receivers. I don't need that 7th good one. I just want 5 of them.
Do you have a break glass in case of emergency? Like if you went past the 7th round, like what would be your advice to someone who waited too long on 0 RB?
Just draft more of them. I think it's really as simple as that. Like, just if you waited to the 8th round for your running back one, then you should have 3 running backs by round 11. You should have 6 running backs by round 18. And I think that's just like the way it's kind of like diminishing returns. Just like whatever position you didn't draft early, draft more of them late. And I think we've kind of overcomplicated best ball with all this stuff. It really just comes down to if my first 4 picks hit, I want to actually bet on them. And you can't pretend like your first 4 picks aren't working out. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in the running anyways.
So I brought up your chart, same chart, but using 2020 data. That's the one we got there in the bottom right. And then behind it was the chart we showed you earlier from last season. I wanted to know if you, looking at these 2 different charts, recognized any differences between the 2 years that stood out in a notable enough fashion to modify your approach to drafts.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is these charts are only going to be as valuable as like what the market is saying. And on Underdog Fantasy this year, the running backs are going like legitimately like a half round to a full round later than they otherwise would. And I think last year's data in particular, there's a spike in the middle by round 9, 10, 11, 12. And that's because that's James Cook, Leonard Fournette, among some other players in that range. So I think if you're looking at this year by year, you're going to get fooled about like, hey, you should draft a running back in around 10, 11, 12. That'd be too granular. And I think as you get more seasons in, we're going to be able to flatten these things out. So I like looking at these things on the graph, but also applying the context. Like, just because Leonard Fournette was a league winner in round 11 doesn't mean there's going to be a round 11 running back this year. Maybe it's the round 6, 7. Maybe Antonio Gibson bounces back, Clyde Edwards-Helaire bounces back, and maybe it's this year. It's round 6, 7 is when you're supposed to be drafting the running back. So that's where I kind of like to flatten these things out and get as many years of data as I possibly can.
That's really interesting to watch the patterns of draft capital coming in for these different positions. We talk about it in our Liga record all the time with the running back shifts and the wide receiver increases. It is really fascinating, and that data helps it out.
And on that point, Austin, like we've talked with several guests about the RB dead zone, right? And like how we've had this influx of talented running backs. Do you see that playing a little bit of at play as you kind of have the numbers match the context?
Yeah, so I think that the running back dead zone is going to exist somewhat no matter what. I do think that this year it's less dead just because the prices have changed a little bit, like I mentioned, and that maybe the like early round running backs are a little bit older than we're used to, like a lot of like 27, 28-year-olds up in that first tier.
Melvin, Fournette,
all those guys. So I do think that there's a chance that maybe a couple of these guys pop in round 6, 7, 8 just because the prices have changed a little bit. I think like Zeke going in the 4th round, I think previously he would still be a 3rd round pick, maybe even a 2nd round pick. We're starting to see some of these guys tilt back a half round. I think that matters a little bit.
But it's like this handful of guys that just don't feel like dead zone guys, like Akers and Dobbins, and like these are like talented dudes, and we're just like, but maybe we're gonna get tricked again. I don't know, or maybe I'm gonna get tricked again based on
they do
getting
seem
drunk
like
off these guys.
Dead man walking right there. Right? Yeah.
So later on in the article, you say that in addition to variance, late round tight ends project as well, if not more than the wide receivers and running backs this deep into drafts. We're about to do a 16-team listener league, and we just did a mock draft for that 16-teamer, and we ended up talking about taking some tight ends later on in the draft than these back-end wide receivers, just because it starts to make sense. They're not a sexy pick, but when the pool is as depleted as it is, it's better to take those back end or those mid-level tight ends than those back end wide receivers. The charts you have here seem to agree with that. Can you speak a bit on that and highlight the most important parts of this chart, as well as drafting there later on in the deeper rounds?
So I think this is going to be especially true this year because the wide receivers are more expensive than they have been at any point in fantasy. And also the elite tight ends seem a little more sus to me. Travis Kelce's 33 years old. George Kittle has a new quarterback and more target competition than he's ever had with peak Deebo, peak Brandon Ayuk. Darren Waller's never had Hunter Renfrow breakout or Davante Adams. Mark Andrews, I think, might be the exception. Maybe Kyle Pitts, but even Kyle Pitts has to deal with bad quarterback play. So I don't think the elite tight ends project as well as like peak Gronk, peak Kelsey, peak George Kittle himself. So I think that by default, I think the late round tight ends are going to project better relative to the position. But I think at the end of the day, you get to a point where it's like we're drafting like wide receiver 3s that might be in like a little bit of a rotation versus like the unsexy Austin Hooper. Like, what is Austin Hooper actually going to do? But at some point, Austin Hooper is going to be there on every single passing down. He's probably going to catch 5 touchdowns, and that wide receiver 3-4 that you think might have a little pop is playing 30% of the snaps, and he's never getting any targets.
I wonder if you do, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, but I wonder if you do a little of this or that, like wide receivers in that range, you're going to pass for, you kind of did it with Hooper, but also the converse, like wide receivers you'd be willing to take in that range over some of the later tight ends like that do have the pops. I'm always looking for the heroin. Inject me with the upside, man.
I got to have my pops, dude.
Yeah, when we're going like that deep into drafts, I'm talking like 16, 17, 18th round in like a 12-team league. We're talking about like 170th plus overall.
Right.
If I can find a wide receiver that I think is going to be in 2 wide receiver sets, and this is something I've learned the last couple of years, is the difference between a wide receiver playing in 3 wide receiver sets and 2 wide receiver sets is a pretty big deal because once you get to the red zone, that little slot receiver is not in that package, and we're all about touchdowns, especially in half PPR. So Donovan Peoples-Jones, Nico Collins, they're playing on bad offenses. We can debate how good they are, but they do win downfield, and they have the size profile to play into wide receiver sets. So basically, at the end of drafts, I'm just kind of sorting: is this player going to be in 2 wide receiver sets, or is he a slot receiver for one of the best passing games in the league? And that's where you got Isaiah McKenzie potentially this year, just like being a slot player in like one of the most explosive offenses.
Buffalo Bills.
Love it.
Like
love it. So before we end the show, Hayden, this has been an absolute treat. We appreciate your time and just all the knowledge you've been dropping here. Do you have any general fantasy football and or best ball philosophies that you'd like to lean on and give Whisper Nation here some advice nuggets here to end it out?
Yeah, I don't think that you should be like team analytics or team film or any of that stuff. I lean on news a lot and contracts and all that stuff. And I think we get carried away by being team analytics or team film and all that stuff a little bit too much. You should be digesting all of this stuff. Like regression matters just as much as like the context of like where players are lining up. Like today we talked about regression. We talked about these charts, but at the same time, it still comes down to how are you being utilized? Are you going to be in red zone packages? All that stuff actually ends up mattering. And you can think a player is so damn good like Trey Sermon, but if the reports are saying that all of a sudden he's out of favor, like you have to follow that stuff. So I spent most of my time reading the beat reporters of the teams and digesting that information. I think that's kind of like the biggest thing that gets overlooked.
Dude, a spreadsheet guy saying, hey, it's not all about the spreadsheets. I love it. Thank you so much, Hayden. That's awesome, man. Well, thank you, and thank Whisper Nation for being here with us. Reminder, we're doing Best Ball Brunch this Saturday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And if you use the promo code TFW on Underdog Fantasy, you get up to $100 in matched money. So use that promo code so Hayden can give you $100 tonight so you can draft and win money with us on Saturday. For Johnny Game Time Hicks, for Austin Sear, I am Big Travie, and we're the Fantasy Whisperers. We're out of here. Peace.
Peace.
Right here.
Hey, do you like mock drafts? We do too. You can come back every Monday and mock with us. Check out one of these videos and make sure